Number 10. Goku. This fight was non-canon but has been the focus of more than one death battle video. Unfortunately, the odds of this happening in the pages of a comic or a manga seem slim, but hey, you never know. The only reason I'm actually ranking this one so low though is because of its non-canon status. Because who wouldn't want to watch a fight and see Superman triumph over Goku at the very end? We all assume these two would have a great fight as they seem so evenly matched, both being from very strong alien races and almost the last of their kind. Goku got bested both times due to his desire to keep it a fair fight. In one of the death battle videos, Goku actually could have won if he had decided to use kryptonite, but he kind of felt like it was cheating, so wah, you lose. Goku just wants to win on brute strength alone. It's all about the power levels.
Oh boy, this is gonna be fun.
You're insane!
Number 9. The Elite. This entire team of anti-heroes got Superman's attention after they started dispatching villains in a brutal and violent way, even killing them. Superman, being very anti-violence, disagreed with their methods and told them to stop it. But their leader, Manchester Black, a powerful telekinetic, refused, laughing in Superman's face. Much to Kal-El's dismay, the team also seemed to be gaining popularity among civilians. The team and Superman eventually came to blows, and just as they thought they had won and defeated him and potentially killed him, Superman reappeared and seemed to hang up his morals momentarily in order to kill them all. The whole battle had been filmed and broadcast, so Manchester Black at least was able to declare that this proved that Superman was no better than they were. He was actually the only one left alive at the end, although Superman did apparently zap his powers away from him. But Superman once again managed to turn the tables on the Elite, revealing that he hadn't actually killed anyone, he just knocked out Manchester Black's teammates, and that his zapping of Manchester Black's powers was actually temporary and he would eventually recover. So yeah. Number 8. Flash. On the alternate Earth 2, Darkseid managed to create a clone of Kal-El, which appeared to possess almost all of the original Kal-El's memories actually. This version of Superman was known as Brutal, and while Superman often struggles to win against the Flash in the main continuity, this version of Superman both outran the Flash and managed to catch him. Even worse, he aimed to stop Jason Garrick, Earth 2's current Flash, from running away from him by crippling one of his legs. Ouch. Number 7. Maxima. Based off of a similar interaction from the comics, Maxima of the royal house of the planet Almerac offered herself to Superman in the Superman animated series. She told him that they were a perfect genetic match and promised that if he was able to best her in combat, she would wed him. He told her that he wasn't interested, which caused her to start a fight with him. He did end up defeating her, but this only strengthened her attraction to him more. Delighted she had finally found someone who she deemed her equal. He beat her, but then she kidnapped him, because that's what you do, I guess, when you're in love with someone and they beat you in combat. Number 6. Batman. Usually Batman is the one that beats Superman. Despite not having superpowers himself, he is pretty much always prepared going into battle with Superman, or with anyone for that matter. It's his superior planning skills and ability to be prepared for any outcome that always gives Batman the upper hand, usually, and the edge in a battle. But what happens when Batman is without this skill? In the Justice League origin storyline from the New 52, we get to see what happens when Batman and Superman fight for the first time. Without Batman's extensive knowledge of Superman, he is left insanely vulnerable to the superpowered Kal-El. Green Lantern even attempts to help Batman out when all of Batman's gadgets that he would normally use to dominate in a fight seem to come up short. But even Green Lantern and Batman together proved no match for the Man of Steel.
Super tickled! No, Gucci.
Moving on to number 5, Dying Wish. Big thanks to user Doug Rosengard for suggesting this one. Now, back in 2012, Marvel caused quite the stir with their Amazing Spider-Man issue 700 with a storyline titled Dying Wish. In it, Spider-Man was replaced with the superior Spider-Man under some pretty intense and baffling circumstances. Now, leading up to this issue, we saw Otto Octavius, aka Dr. Ock, come up with a terrible scheme to switch bodies with Peter Parker. He was practically on his deathbed and he managed to science his way into swapping with Parker, with Peter being forced into Otto's decaying body. Now that is a brutal way to be defeated, but after a whole lot of backlash and a complex storyline, Peter was eventually restored to his body. Yet Otto still managed to pull off the stunt for over a year, which to be fair did lead to some interesting character development, but still. sometimes Peter just has it really rough, guys. In at 4, Batman beats Superman. The Dark Knight and the Man of Steel have fought numerous times over the years, but perhaps the most influential and iconic brawl of theirs comes at the hand of Frank Miller and his Dark Knight Returns series. It features an aging Bruce Wayne, who, seeing Gotham being tormented by a new gang of ultra-violent hoodlums, returns to his vigilante ways. Now eventually Superman is called in to intervene, a tool of the government's now, and Batman takes him on. He dons an exoskeleton suit with synthetic kryptonite and even has Green Arrow shoot the Man of Steel with a kryptonite arrow, of course. Now he pretty much has Clark defeated when he himself dies. It's then revealed that Bruce faked his own death, becoming a martyr of sorts and working with his resistance underground. Something that Clark eventually figures out on his own when he hears Bruce's heart still beating at his funeral. Now, sure, overall in the battle Clark held back a little, but Bruce could have definitely killed Superman if he wanted to. But he still managed to outsmart him, and most importantly, he made a point, which was kind of the purpose of the battle in the long run, really. It's still a pretty memorable defeat for the Man of Steel overall. Got your butt whooped by a mortal in an exoskeleton suit. He's just smarter than you cause you're Superman. And sometimes you're not bright. And at number 3, Kingdom Come. Now big shout out to user Kingdom Come Superman who dropped this suggestion in the comments of our part 1 video. Kingdom Come, a 4-issue series penned by Alex Ross and Mark Waid under the Elseworlds imprint, was released in 1996 to rave reviews. The story, a deconstructionist tale set in the future, follows the increasing conflict between traditional superheroes of the past and a new generation of metahumans taking their place. They're incredibly amoral and irresponsible, and some of them are even the children of previous heroes to boot. Major spoilers to follow if you have not read this / want to. In the end, see, spoilers, the United Nations ends up deploying 3 nuclear warheads against the metahuman threat. Batman and Wonder Woman manage to stop 2 of them, but the last one still blows up, except it does considerably less damage thanks to Captain Marvel Billy Batson. Now most of the metahumans are killed in this explosion, and Superman ends up flying over to the UN, threatening to destroy it as a punishment for the massacre that they caused. Luckily he calms down and agrees to be an advisor for the UN in the future, but still, that's kind of a major loss. Metahuman massacre? Yeah. Bad. Speaking of massacres, and at number 2, the Infinity Gauntlet. In 1991, Jim Starlin penned a 6-issue limited series that put his creation Thanos in the forefront of a massive Marvel conflict that spanned the entire universe. Starlin had been gearing up to this with Thanos, who was hunting down the Infinity Gems previously in order to become omnipotent in the name of the entity Death, whom he loved. Now he was going to prove his love to her by eliminating half of all living beings in the universe. Which he did, and yes, he snapped to do it, that's where they got it from. But unlike the MCU version, Thanos collected all of the gems, built himself a nifty little HQ in space, kidnapped his brother and his granddaughter Nebula, tortured them, and then had to deal with Adam Warlock gathering all the remaining superheroes who hadn't disappeared, along with a bunch of cosmic entities and other powerful beings to take him on in an epic onslaught. Thanos would crush them all though, and it wasn't until he let his guard down that Nebula managed to swipe the gauntlet from him, which eventually led to his temporary downfall. But regardless, that epic battle we mentioned, it resulted in some of the most brutal defeats. Vision had his insides yanked out. Cyclops, in beautiful irony, had his head stuck in an indestructible box as he was trying to use his optic blast, which incinerated his head. Wolverine's adamantium bones were turned into rubber, and Cap, well, Thanos just kinda bitch slapped him, so no one's really coming out of that one feeling good about themselves, are they? And finally, last but not least, in at number 1, the MCU Avengers Infinity War. Speaking of the Infinity Gauntlet, let's take a look at the Marvel Cinematic Universe adaptation of it, or rather the storyline that was largely informed by it, in Avengers Infinity War. For starters, fans of the comic and the films will already know this. The stories are not the same. Infinity War mainly adapts elements from the Infinity Gauntlet comic, and the big loss in that film that we're talking about at this number is basically a giant spoiler for the entire movie and played with the elements of the original. Instead of all of the heroes going after Thanos after he snapped, they all tried to stop him from getting the Infinity Stones and failed. Now Thanos snaps and bam, there goes half of all living things in the universe. It was a very bold choice for an ending as far as Marvel Studios was concerned. It was bleak, heart-wrenching, and also set up Marvel to make a crap ton of money with the film's follow-up Avengers Endgame. And in that film, well, let's just say there's a resolution, in case you're one of the only people on the planet who hasn't seen the movie. And at number 10, Aquaman and his hand. Oh, let's start off this loss list with a very literal physical loss. Oh, poor Arthur Curry. The hook didn't help his image much, did it? Once upon a time, Aquaman fought a villain called Charybdis, who not only forced the aquatic hero to lose his hand thanks to sticking his whole arm in a river full of hungry piranhas, but he also stole Arthur's ability to communicate with sea life, all as a means to poison the earth. That's like Aquaman's thing. That's so mean. That's like going up to Superman being like, I'ma take your ability to fly and not suck, you know? That's That's Aquaman's big thing, he can talk to fish. Or, sorry, psychically influence them. Now there's nothing like seeing a superhero's bones practically sucked clean of flesh to signify a pretty big loss. Aquaman may have won the battle, he does throw his foe into the same river, letting the piranhas annihilate him whole, but it is still a devastating defeat when you come back from a battle with only one hand intact, that is for sure. Moving on to number 9, something just as grim, Elektra's death. Here we have an instance of a time in comic book history where a villain succeeded in murdering a superhero. In this case, it is Bullseye skewering Elektra with her own weapon in Daredevil issue 181. At the time of the release, it was considered to be one of the most graphic depictions of violence post-Comics Code Authority. The panels depicting the aftermath are even harder to read, with Elektra's blood spilling out of her and her crawling her way to Matt Murdock's doorstep, where she dies in his arms. She eventually would be resurrected, because who isn't these days? But the death of this anti-hero is definitely one that has managed to stick in readers' minds for decades. And I mean, technically she was still kind of a villain at the time, but we're letting that slide. And at number 8, Superman vs. Venom. So when you hear that matchup, you might assume that, Superman might have the advantage. He's the Man of Steel, he wins like all the time. You would probably even guess that he defeated Marvel's parasitic symbiote creature. Well, once upon a time, in the 1996 DC vs. Marvel crossover, specifically DC Marvel All Access issue number 1, the Man of Steel had his butt handed to him when Venom used his symbiote slime to practically suffocate Supes, getting into his eyes and mouth after Venom slaps him around a bit and also bites him a lot. This all goes down when Superman tries to interfere in a duel between Venom and Spider-Man, so Venom shows him who runs this town. It's also during that time period where Superman had a mullet, so really, this is kind of his own fault. Can you blame Venom? Yeah. Look at that mullet. And at number 7, Pantha and Superboy. Now this loss is one of the most shocking deaths to occur on our list. Now back in Infinite Crisis, DC killed off Pantha in one of the most volatile ways possible. She literally jumped in behind Superboy Prime, who, to be fair, was incredibly distracted and absolutely mental at that moment. He turned around and then punched her head off. Yeah, he punched her head off. Like, yeah. Her head exploded, it was not pretty. Sure, it is one hell of a way to go that, yeah, is kind of memorable and probably didn't hurt much past the initial split-second impact, thankfully, but that is definitely one way to suffer a defeat, especially an unexpected one. And at number 6, Doctor Strange and his cape. Here's another one of those more embarrassing defeats, and it comes from one of Marvel's alternate universes this time, the 1610 Ultimates universe. For those of you who don't know, the Ultimate Universe reimagines all of Marvel's characters in a more modern, more grim way. It was beloved, until its penultimate event. No pun intended. Titled Ultimatum, many readers felt that this story arc brought about the end of the 1610 universe, and ruined much of what they loved about it. There's some pretty whack stuff that occurs in this arc, and many characters die in gruesome ways, including Doctor Strange. When facing off against his foe Dormammu, the demon causes Strange's cape to wrap itself around him, constricting him, to the point where it is so darn tight that his head turns purple and explodes, killing the master of mystical arts. Yeah, lots of exploding heads on this list. Moving on. And at number 5, Doctor Strange strangled by his cape. For this number, we're diving into an alternate universe in the Marvel Multiverse, the Ultimate Universe, Earth 1610. This universe is categorized by significantly grittier versions of our beloved 616 heroes, and during the penultimate event in that universe, Ultimatum, many a hero and villain experience particularly brutal demises, including Dr. Stephen Strange. While fighting against Dormammu, Strange is killed in one of the most absurd ways, by his own cloak. It's a move that's never been pulled by the ruler of the Dark Dimension in the regular 616, but in the Ultimate Universe it's something that surprisingly worked. Strange is strangled by his cloak, turning his face purple until his head explodes due to all of his blood being squeezed up into his head. Needless to say, it was pretty darn gruesome. Up next, number 4, Beast Boy and the drugged envelope. The Judas Contract is by far one of the most memorable Teen Titans stories in the group's history. During this story arc, a metahuman the name of Terra joins up with the Titans. Her and Beast Boy, aka Changeling, which is what he was going by at the time, developed a bit of a romantic relationship. It's then revealed that Terra has been playing the Titans all along, and is in cahoots with one of their biggest foes, Deathstroke. During the story's climax, the sinister duo uses various methods to subdue the Titans, one of which is really embarrassing for Beast Boy. They take advantage of his vanity, sending him dozens of letters with requests for autographs from fangirls. Gar is like super into this, and he gets straight to work signing pictures and licking envelopes. But turns out the glue on the envelopes has been drugged. As he realizes what's happened, he is knocked out cold. Up next, number 3, Wasp, and that time that she fell out of a tree. Yes, this is actually a thing that happened. And yes, you probably guessed it, it happened during the Silver Age, when comics were at their wackiest. This case in particular featured Avengers member Wasp, who had escaped conflict in an exhausted state, seeking out the rest of the team in aid, because apparently back in the early days of the Avengers she wasn't overly useful. In the process, when shrunken down, she's almost eaten by a hungry little bird. But after growing in size, the tree branch that she was perched on snaps, and she falls to the ground, unable to shrink down in time to save herself. So she lands on the ground and is knocked unconscious. Perhaps my favorite part of these panels is the very end, where the final panel reads, "But now we must leave the fallen Avenger as she lies silent and still in the lonely glen, for there are other urgent matters which concern us." God, jeez. Clearly even the writers didn't care about Wasp back then. Kinda harsh, guys. Up next, number 2, Wonder Woman and Men. In Wonder Woman's earlier days, she had to endure a handful of stories in which her feminist prowess was shut down by silly plot devices. Like this one. According to the Amazonian law in the Golden Age, if a man ever binded Wonder Woman's bracelets together, she would lose her powers. Seems kind of counterintuitive to her character, doesn't it? Part of this was because of her creator William M. Marston's BDSM background and influence on Wonder Woman's characters. Case in point, when this occurred, Wonder Woman has a thought bubble that reads, "When an Amazon girl permits a man to chain her bracelets of submission together, she becomes weak as other women in a man-ruled world." For f***'s sake. I mean, yes, it was the 40s after all. We're just glad this silly stipulation has been retconned out of existence. Last but not least, in our number 1 spot, Deathstroke kicks the JLA's butts. This is arguably the Justice League of America's most embarrassing failure. Potentially. In the Identity Crisis storyline, Elongated Man's wife, Sue Dibney, is murdered, with Dr. Light presumed to be the murderer. Over the course of the story, it becomes apparent that members of the Justice League have been in on a whole controversial mind-wipe scheme that individuals like Batman were not privy to. It's a whole lot of moral grayness, and the way Sue's at the hands of Dr. Light was approached is something that the story gets a lot of heat for. Spoiler alert, the JLA's response was to mind-wipe everyone who was involved. Batman was also mind-wiped in order to prevent him from making everyone take the moral high ground. Anyway, that's all context. Dr. Light, who had been mind-wiped into a literal buffoon, hired Deathstroke Slade Wilson to help protect himself from the JLA. Deathstroke takes on Green Arrow, The Flash, Zatanna, Elongated Man, Hawkman, The Atom, and Black Canary. And guess what? Deathstroke won.
At number 10, we have A Fight Under a Red Sun. In 1978, there was a comic with an evil alien leader called Ratlat that comes to Earth looking for Earth's champion to fight his champion. Superman and, drumroll please, Muhammad Ali nominate themselves. I mean, it's 1978, that's the year that Ali became the first heavyweight champion to win the belt 3 times, so it makes sense. The alien leader decides they should first fight to see who's the best. And to make it fair, they have a fight off-world in the light of a red sun, thus making Superman just like the rest of us. Funny enough, Ali crushes him, like no question about it. Then he goes and fights the alien's best fighter and beats him too. That's right, Ali becomes the greatest fighter in the universe. Then, because Superman is weakened, he also saves him and helps him get his powers back. At number 9, we have A Life-Sucking Plant. Eat your heart out, Poison Ivy. In The Man Who Has Everything, Robin, Wonder Woman, and Batman are heading to Superman's Fortress of Solitude for his birthday party. I know, super cute, right? I guess I never really think about the fact that, supers have birthdays and stuff like that, so cute. However, instead of getting his drink on to celebrate or putting out snacks for his guests, he is under attack by Mongol, who has brought along Black Mercy. What is that, you might ask? Well, it is a plant that lulls you into a dreamlike state while it sucks the life out of you. I know, it's a very, very evil plant. Wonder Woman and Batman end up under its control in the heroic efforts to save Superman. Enter Robin. This is his moment to shine. Robin intervenes just before Mogul kills Superman and places the Black Mercy on Mogul instead. At number 8, we have an altered future. In Justice League 3000, there is a universe that is controlled by 5 super beings. To battle these guys, the Justice League is brought back to life, but without their full powers. It almost gets comical in my mind at this point. Superman, since he is essentially a god, is brought back a lot weaker than the rest. I guess to balance the scale out a bit. The huge point though is that he can no longer fly, and he keeps forgetting that he can't. Thankfully, the one time that he tries to jump off of a big building, the Green Lantern is around and is able to grab him before he falls to his death. It's just kind of a ridiculous one. At number 7, we have the Black Light. In Justice League America Act of God, it shows the aftermath of an unexplainable event called the Black Light, which irrevocably removes the powers of every super being. As you might imagine, this drives a lot of superheroes crazy. It was their purpose in life, and now it's just been taken away. Lois Lane grows tired of just plain old Clark Kent and leaves him. As, maybe no surprise to fans, he ends up getting together with Wonder Woman. Woo, it happens! But their relationship goes south when Clark is just down in the dumps and depressed over it, and Diana is all like hopeful, and this is just a test, and we're all gonna get our powers back. If you just have faith, it's gonna come together. He ends up in a mess. He ends up homeless, living on the streets for a time, but then they make up and they get married and they have a kid. So, it ends on a happy note there, and there's also a hint that the child might carry on the super legacy. There is hope. On to number 6, where we are looking at a sort of time travel thing with a red sun thing. In Justice League Unlimited, there is an episode called Hereafter, where there are villains called the Superman's Revenge Squad. Creative name, I know. In a battle, Wonder Woman is about to get shot by an energy cannon when Superman dives in front of her to save her from the energy, and it vaporizes him on the spot. Twist, it actually transports him 30,000 years into the future, where he awakens with no powers, as he is under the Earth's now red sun. In this future, he meets his immortal villain, Vandal Savage, who actually feels bad about having killed the Justice League and quickening the death of the Earth. And since he has millennials to think over this, he realizes that the quest for power is meaningless. Lucky for Superman, he happens to have a time machine on hand in his mansion that was built on the rubble of Metropolis. So Superman gets a special power source to repower it and repower the superheroes in his time. Vidal tells him everything he needs to know in order to beat his former self, and then Superman heads back to put things right.
In at number 5, the Spectre. Resurrection is a theme on our list today. The Spectre is another DC character who has risen from the dead, but arguably some could say that he actually gained more by losing everything. Sort of. First appearing in Morph Comics issue 52 from 1940, he used to be a man named Jim Corrigan, a hard-boiled cop who was knocked off by thugs while he was on his way to his engagement party. He was stuffed in a barrel, the barrel filled with cement and then dumped into some water. He's brought back to Earth when his spirit is refused entry to the afterlife, with an entity called the Voice returning him to the world of the living in order to seek out revenge. He then kills the thugs who murdered him and breaks up with his fiancée. He was later revived in the Silver Age by Julius Schwartz, leaning into that undead spirit vibe some more, with his powers vastly increasing, making him nigh omnipotent. So maybe he actually gained something from all of this, but also had to leave his mortal life behind. Moving on to number 4, Jessica Jones. Jessica Jones is yet another character on our list who has a tragic origin story. Debuting in Alias issue 1 in 2001, Jessica Campbell was a student who went to the same high school as Peter Parker did, Midtown High. Her father had scored free tickets to Disney World, and on their way back from that family vacation there, Jessica and her family get into a car crash. But not just a regular old car crash. They collide with a military convoy carrying radioactive chemicals. Jessica's whole family is killed off, she ends up in a coma for several months, and then wakes up to the horrific news that all of her loved ones are pretty much deceased. She ends up in an orphanage and is adopted by the Jones family, who then re-enroll her at Midtown High. Peter, who sees her as a kindred spirit, tries to reach out to her, but she lashes out at him, confusing his kindness for pity. But Parker does inspire her to do something. At this point, her powers of super strength, durability, and flight have manifested, and upon witnessing Spider-Man fight Sandman at Midtown High, she's inspired to put her powers to good use. And then there's that whole thing that happened with Kilgrave the Purple Man, which also did not help matters much, but that's another story for another list. Moving on to number 3, Spawn. Spawn, the demonic character created by Todd McFarlane for Image Comics, who debuted in 1992, lost everything when he was murdered. Before becoming Spawn, he was Al Simmons, a highly intelligent and physically fit CIA agent with a past of working in the Marine Corps and the Secret Service. Working now as a highly capable assassin, Al goes on a mission with his partner and best friend Bruce Stinson, who then betrays him under the orders of their boss, director Jason Wynn. Now, because of the deaths he caused while he was alive, he is sent to hell and ends up making a deal with the devil to become Hellspawn and work for him, as long as he's allowed to see his wife Wanda one last time. The devil is like, sure, I can make that work, but as most deals with the devil go, there's some conditions that Al did not anticipate. When he returns, he has no memory of his previous life except for the fact that his name was Al Simmons. His body has been badly burned, and in addition to this, he now has a demonic guardian overseeing him, named the Violator, whose job it is to cultivate evil souls on Earth for Satan. The two don't get along very well. They're like arch enemies. Anywho, the whole lack of memory thing means Spawn doesn't even remember his wife's name. So he has literally lost everything because he can't remember at first. Of course, it doesn't stay that way, but it is still a big loss regardless. In at number 2, Eric Draven. Eric Draven, aka The Crow, has one of the most tragic origin stories in comics. It is dark as my friends. Eric, the protagonist from the initial Crow comic, was on his way back from a romantic getaway with his fiancée Shelley when their car breaks down on a deserted road. Another car stops by, but not to help them. It is full of rowdy men who are part of a gang. They shoot Eric in the head, which paralyzes him, and then force him to watch as they rape Shelley and eventually murder her. Eric then dies in the hospital a few hours later. Flash forward to a year later, Eric is resurrected by the Crow and seeks out vengeance on the gang members. His story has been reimagined as well in an additional 10-issue series published by Image Comics, and it isn't any better. This time the thugs mistakenly murder them days before their wedding. And finally, in at number 1, Wally West. Let's look at a character who, more recently, in the New 52, had so much of his life stripped away. In 2011, when DC rebooted their universe with the New 52, many were shocked to see that the Flash, Wally West, had been written out entirely, as if he never existed. He would then return in DC Rebirth in a story that explained his absence by revealing that Wally had been lost in the Speed Force for 10 years, following the events of Flashpoint, with Barry Allen eventually dragging him out of the Speed Force, which is why he returned. Wally's family remained wiped from existence with no one who could remember them aside from himself, which caused his mental health to seriously deteriorate. Because of this, he sought out help for his trauma that he was enduring, ended up at the Superhero Rehabilitation Sanctuary. But his feelings of isolation became too much, something in him snapped, and he ended up massacring several heroes who were also at Sanctuary. And hey, if you were trapped in the Speed Force for 10 years, you probably wouldn't be the sanest either. But he did try to cover it up by running into the future, killing his future self, and then bringing back his corpse in order to make it look like he was one of the victims too. That didn't work, and eventually it was revealed that he was responsible. Then he willingly went with the Justice League to a prison of theirs. Yeah, tough time for Wally. But apparently he's getting godlike powers now, so I guess good for him? Starting us off in at number 10, Thor losing to Beta Ray Bill. Let's start off our list with a defeat that was suggested to us by user Peter Tyson. That time that Beta Ray Bill whooped Thor's butt. And it was all just a misunderstanding, embarrassingly enough. Beta Ray Bill, who first appeared in the Mighty Thor issue 337 back in 1983, was depicted as a monster who turned out to be a hero. He was the first character introduced outside of the Norse-themed mythology of characters that had proven to be worthy to lift Thor's hammer, Mjolnir. But let's backtrack for a sec. So, Thor was sent on a mission by S.H.I.E.L.D. to go investigate an alien fleet that was passing through Earth's galaxy. Now when Thor finds the ship, he perceives it as a threat, and the ship spits Beta Ray Bill out of it to fight Thor. Now thanks to a silly hang-up that Mjolnir used to have, Thor would turn back to his normal persona if he was separated from the hammer for more than 60 seconds. It's silly, we know. Bill was able to defeat him, and eventually it became obvious that the whole thing was just one big misunderstanding. But it was still pretty embarrassing for Thor. Now Thor would get Mjolnir back, and as a consolation, Bill was gifted Stormbreaker, the weapon that Thor actually helped craft in Avengers Infinity War in the MCU, although it has a very different origin in the comics. You'll find it. I trust in you. The power of Google is strong. Moving on to number 9, US agent loses his arm and leg. Now there's a lot of instances where superheroes have lost a leg or a limb or a body part when defeated. Fighting crime is risky business, friends. Even US Agent, the mean dollar store version of Captain America, has gone maimed in combat. US Agent, aka John Walker, was one of the heroes who tried to combat Norman Osborn during the Siege event. And in Mighty Avengers issue 36, he tried to stop the Thunderbolts from stealing Odin's spear for Osborn. That did not go too well for Walker. The character Nuke managed to get his hands on the weapon first, and then proceeded to use it to chop off Walker's left arm and left leg. In the aftermath, Walker refused to use prosthetic limbs and preferred to move around in a wheelchair, although he would eventually somehow be healed. Still counts as a major defeat though. Up next at 8, Captain Marvel beating Iron Man into a coma. This one actually comes as a suggestion from Black Phoenix 77. That time that Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers, beat Iron Man into a coma. Now in 2016, Civil War II came to fruition. Similar to its predecessor, it saw the superpowered individuals on Earth facing off against each other thanks to a clashing of opinions and perspectives. Rather than Captain America versus Iron Man though, it was Captain Marvel, Carol Danvers versus Tony this time around. It all went down when an Inhuman named Ulysses showed up with a power to perceive the future. Carol thinks it should be used to prevent crime, whereas Tony is all for free will. The story concluded with Carol and Tony duking it out in Washington, D.C. and Carol essentially beat him into a coma in the process. Tony would disappear from the Marvel Universe for about 2 years, returning to his comic Invincible Iron Man in 2018. Speaking of Invincible, and at number 7, Invincible. No relation. Invincible is a series created by Robert Kirkman for Image Comics that ran from 2002 to 2003. It followed the son of a hero named Omni-Man, who was an alien from the Viltrumite race with super strength, invulnerability, enhanced healing, and flight. And he devoted himself to protecting Earth. His son is a hero named Invincible, who's got the same skill set as Daddy Dearest, but was having trouble adjusting to his newfound abilities. Now flash forward to later on in the story, where the narrative takes us to a story arc concerning the Viltrumite War. A villain by the name of Conquest challenges Invincible for control over Earth. And turns out, dude is way too powerful for our hero. They end up having a rematch of sorts, and Invincible decides he's going to go for the kill by strangling him. But Conquest outsmarts him. Kind of. He punches a hole through Invincible's body and then just pulls out all of his intestines and other bodily bits. Now Invincible manages to hold on through all of that pain and strangles Conquest to death after all, but it takes him a whole 10 months to recover from his insides literally being pulled outside of his body. And yeah, it's a series of gruesome panels, that's for sure. So I guess it's like a defeat but with a silver lining? Or a win with really crappy consequences? You can tell me in those comments below. Up next at number 6, Wolverine ripped in half. Man, poor Wolverine, he's suffered a lot of really brutal defeats, but this one in particular pertains to him and the Hulk. Now the Hulk and Wolverine have been rivals of sorts ever since Wolverine first hit the panels, when the brooding mutant debuted in Incredible Hulk issue 180 in 1974. Although they're both on the side of good, the two have butted heads a bunch over the years. So it makes sense that in the Ultimate Universe on Earth 1610, that we would see a different form of that rivalry emerge. Now for starters, the Ultimate Universe has a tendency to be more volatile than the 616 universe. Characters are significantly more crude, including the Hulk. Dude is pretty much a cannibal on this earth. Now, let's jump over to the Ultimate Wolverine vs. Hulk series, a 6-issue miniseries that has Logan sent to the Himalayas to assassinate Hulk for S.H.I.E.L.D. As you can tell from the title of our number, that did not go as planned. Issue 1 of the series literally begins with Wolverine dragging his upper half through the snow, looking for his lower half, which has gone missing because Hulk. We get to see more of the grisly details of their battle and the aftermath and what follows. But yeah, getting ripped in half definitely counts as a defeat, or at least in my books. To be fair, he was still mobile, but you know, missing the lower half of the body, that quality of life just goes downhill, you know? It's no bueno. If you have your lower half ripped off, you probably bleed out and die eventually. And at number 5, The Punisher. Wolverine has clashed with the Punisher from time to time, but he came out for the worse on one particular brutal occasion in 2002. Taking place in Punisher issue 17, Frank Castle and Logan got into an epic duel that resulted in Castle running Wolverine over with a steamroller. A steamroller, you guys. It's worth noting that he also blasted Wolverine's face off with a shotgun prior, hence why his adamantium skeleton is showing, and he also managed to shoot off Wolverine's testicles in the process. As you can tell, Logan had a tough day. And who do we owe for this immensely brutal display? Garth Ennis, of course. These were the days before The Boys, so you know, he had to blow off steam somehow. Get it? Steam, because it was a steamroller. I'm a comedic genius. Let's move on. In at number 4, Cyclops. The Age of Apocalypse timeline, aka Earth 295, featured a version of Wolverine who went by the name of Weapon X at first. Now this version was in a romantic relationship with Jean Grey, while Cyclops was off working with Apocalypse and was straight up evil. The two of them would get into a fight, Cyclops and Wolverine that is, still being of opposite ideologies even on this alternate timeline, with Wolverine blinding Cyclops in one eye and Cyclops using his optic blast to cut off one of Wolverine's hands. Talk about an eye for an eye, or a hand for an eye? Eventually this version of Logan would end up getting a cannon on that arm, and went by Weapon Omega, except would become way more of an antagonist by the time the cybernetic enhancements rolled around. Moving on to number 3, Days of Future Past. In 1981, during the famous Days of Future Past story arc in Uncanny X-Men issue 142, Wolverine was practically eviscerated by a Sentinel. Now, Days of Future Past depicts a future timeline in which Sentinels, mutant-killing robots, are working towards a full mutant genocide. The surviving X-Men struggle to stay alive, and at one point, Colossus, Storm, and Wolverine sneak into a facility to destroy some of these robotic foes. Unfortunately, they run into a Sentinel who spots them and immediately wipes him out, zapping Wolverine mid-air after Colossus tosses Logan up in the air to attack him. The Sentinel even gets sassy while he does it, stating, "pathetic organic being," calling him arrogant, insulting that the three mutants even believed their plan would work in the first place. Harsh. In at number 2, Magneto. One of Wolverine's most intense losses on Earth 616 comes at the hands of the X-Men's #1 nemesis, Magneto. In 1993's X-Men crossover Fatal Attractions, Magneto returns with his acolytes to confront the X-Men in a story that put Charles Xavier's morality to the test. Now, during the story's penultimate conflict, Magneto is nearly gutted by Wolverine, and in a fit of rage, he tears the adamantium off of Wolverine's skeleton. Think about that for a sec. That's painful. This leads Xavier to lose his crap, and he mind wipes Magneto, making him catatonic. This would inevitably lead to the creation of Onslaught, but that's for another list. Wolverine struggles to stay alive, with the comic depicting flashes of what's going on in his consciousness. Eventually he recovers from his injuries, and we also learn that his claws were actually made of bone all along. Still, it is one of the character's most iconic defeats, and the consequences of Xavier's actions would play a major role in X-Men stories and all of the Marvel Universe's stories shortly afterwards. And finally, in at number 1, the Hulk from the Ultimate Universe. The Ultimate Universe, also known as Earth 1610, has some of the most grim and brutal reimaginings of Marvel characters. Case in point, Bruce Banner's Hulk. Now, this Hulk is trapped permanently in his Hulk form, which he is fine with. He's entirely amoral and is even into cannibalism. Yum. He's considered a last resort weapon by the Ultimates and other teams on Earth because of how destructive and unethical he is. He straight up tried to rape Betty Ross people, not a good guy here. And in the Ultimate Universe, this grim Hulk still has a rivalry with Wolverine, except takes it to a whole nother level when the two of them are in combat and he rips Wolverine literally in half. He then just leaves Logan lying there still alive on the ground, having to crawl back to his lower half. Now, there's very few images more iconic than the Ultimate Wolverine getting his guts ripped apart by the Ultimate Hulk when it comes to the times that the Clawed Mutant has lost a battle. Number 10, Oil Needed, Iron Man. Back in Iron Man's early days, his suits weren't up to par with what we're familiar with today. In Avengers issue 2, right after the team's inaugural issue, the group fights Space Phantom, who intends on invading Earth with an alien force. Phantom comes to the planet first and ends up impersonating members of the Avengers team, which causes a lot of confusion and fighting within the team. The group has caught on to Space Phantom's shtick, and Thor incapacitates him by using his weather manipulation abilities to create a rainstorm that causes Iron Man's suit to rust over. Now, to be fair, it was Space Phantom impersonating Tony Stark here, and technically he was the one to suffer the loss. But considering that he was mimicking the hero, that's a pretty bad design flaw to bring to light. Needless to say, we're glad that Tony caught on to that before any real damage occurred to the beloved hero. Up next, number 9, Batwoman as a plot device. Always a shame when a superhero, especially a female superhero, is used merely as a plot device to further the story of another character, usually a male. It's really the basis of the women in refrigerators argument. Don't know it? Google it. You should. Anyway, this was the case with the initial Batwoman Kathy Kane. While the modern day Batwoman Kate Kane has gone above and beyond her former iteration, back in the day when she was created in 1956 as a means to give Batman a Batman family in the aftermath of the Comics Code Authority, and claims that Batman and Robin were gay, she was literally a fluff heroine whose utility belt included devices disguised as lipstick and compact mirrors. Yeah. When Detective Comics issue 485 came around in 1979, Kathy Kane was killed off unceremoniously, with the League of Assassins brutally murdering her. The whole story was a plot device for Batman to have a reason to go after the League of Assassins. Yikes. Moving on to number 8, Hank Pym and Pymtron. Oh, this one is sad. Hank Pym has one of the most ridiculous histories as far as Marvel characters are concerned. He has been through a lot. But most recently, we witnessed a whole new humiliating saga for Henry Pym in which he physically merged with Ultron, the robot he created in the comics that became one of the most memorable Avengers foes. During the Infinity Countdown story arc, Ultron managed to steal the Soul Gem, and a fragment of Hank's soul ended up trapped within the Stone Soul world. Now at the time the two had merged, but really it was just kind of Ultron wearing Hank's skin. While Hank was in there, he experienced an idyllic fantasy in which the Avengers had saved him and he was home reunited with his friends. In reality, a demon, the all-consuming Devondra, was busy consuming his soul. We haven't heard from him since. And it's been a little while and he might be gone forever, but probably not because comics. But even then, he'll probably be brought back and something horrible will happen to him. It's the Hank Pym way. Up next, number 7, Batman punched by Hal Jordan. Batman has long disliked members of the Green Lantern Corps. It took him a very long time to be willing to trust Hal Jordan after he had become Parallax in the Emerald Twilight storyline. While Hal was possessed by the villain, he ended up going on a rampage and killing several Lanterns and Guardians, and we all know how Bruce has major trust issues. In Green Lantern Rebirth issue 6, Hal has had enough with Batman's resentment and open hostility. Hal felt he had paid his dues. He sacrificed himself to reignite the sun after he was resurrected, and he's been working real hard to prove to everyone that he is one of the good guys. Batman doesn't entirely buy it, so what does Hal do? Well, he punches him in front of a bunch of other Green Lanterns. But to be fair, Batman kinda had it coming. He's long been an to not just Hal Jordan, but to other Green Lanterns in the past. Which actually brings us to our next number. In at 6, Batman punches a different Green Lantern. Long before Hal Jordan smashed his fist into the world's greatest detective's chin, Batman was on the giving end of a similar interaction. This time it was between the Caped Crusader and another Green Lantern, Guy Gardner, who is arguably the least like Green Lantern out there. 'Cause he's a bit of a dick. Anyway, this went down in the Justice League issue 5 with Batman being fed up of Guy's insufferable attitude. Batman was the one in charge of the Justice League International team and Guy was just whining all the time. Guy makes it clear that he thinks Batman shouldn't be the leader of the team, and he's constantly sulking and complaining about how he should be the one in charge instead. So what does Bats do in order to establish his dominance? Well, he knocks Guy out with one punch in front of the rest of the team. Regardless of socking Guy in the face, Batman is still all business, getting a team meeting underway as Guy lies unconscious on the floor. The best part is the reactions from the rest of the team. And at number 5, Jason Todd. Oh, Jason Todd. After Crisis on Infinite Earths, when Todd, the second Robin, got a character makeover that made him more street, he was thrust into a controversial storyline in which DC readers could call in to determine his fate. Now, for context, Todd was investigating his biological mother in the story, who he tracks down in Ethiopia. The Joker finds out about this and starts to blackmail the kid over providing his mother medical supplies that she is in dire need of. But turns out his mom was actually embezzling money from an aid agency as part of a cover-up. She then turns her own son over to the Joker. And what the Joker did next was the result of the calling and gimmick going haywire. The Joker brutally beats Jason to death with a crowbar. Now it turns out in real life, one dude had programmed his computer to call into DC on repeat, with the answer no. As in, no, Jason Todd should not live. Which drastically changed the poll's results. And actually is kind of another loss for Jason in itself. And really, if you think about it, it's actually a triple loss, because Jason lost again when he got replaced by Tim Drake, so overall, you know, tough time for little Jason. He was brought back to life, so I don't feel as bad. Speaking of death, in at number 4, Captain America and Civil War. At the end of the first Civil War story arc, Captain America loses not only the war, but his life too. Yikes. This goes down in the Civil War epilogue titled The Death of Captain America. After the hero surrendered to Tony Stark's Iron Man and was arrested, things went pretty much downhill fast for the beloved character. While in prison, Red Skull hires villain Crossbones to assassinate Rogers, who goes after him on his way to the courthouse for his trial. Crossbones proceeds to snipe Cap in the back of his neck and stomach, which kills him, or at least killing him for the time being, that is. He came back, and actually we sort of have our next number to thank for that death trend. In at number 3, the death of Superman. Oh, surprise surprise, Kelly puts the death of Superman on a top 10 nerd list again. Wow. To all of you Nerd Squad peeps out there, I'm not sorry. I also don't hate Superman, for the record. It's just that this story arc is so baffling and so very much a cash grab on DC's part that it's hard to ignore. Plus it had major consequences on the comic book industry, which personally I do love me some historical context. Now for those of you who are like, sorry, what's the big deal here? What's the death of Superman? Well, A, I talk about it a lot, and B, allow me to introduce it to you, friend. The death of Superman, in short, was a story arc in 1993 in which Superman faced off against Doomsday in a literal punching match, and it resulted in both of their deaths. Not only was the comic book world shook by this, but it was big news in pop culture that Superman had been killed off. Until DC was like, psych, he's still alive, he just fell into a Kryptonian coma, which looks like he's dead, but he's not. And by the way, thanks for the $3 million this issue made us on its first day. The comic sold 6 million copies, and when it was revealed that Superman was actually alive, many felt betrayed by DC, voicing that the arc felt like a publicity stunt, which yeah, it was. It also drastically changed the way that comic book writers treat death in the medium. The number of characters who died and were brought back after that 1993 comic exponentially increased. So yeah, no hate on Superman, minus his mullet. Just a lot of dislike of that era in DC's history. Up next at number 2, the Bat's broken back. So perhaps Superman's death may have had wider consequences not only on the DC universe but also on the industry itself, and despite Superman's death having wider consequences not only on the DC universe but also on the industry itself, it is still hard to not immediately think of this number before the Man of Steel's when considering superhero defeats. Because really, Superman just got punched into a coma and he still retained a lot coming out of that show. But Batman, on the other hand, after he had his back broken by Bane, his story took a very interesting turn and resulted in him having to return to a Gotham that was worse than when he left it, and his reputation was trashed. So, let's backtrack for some context. Occurring in the 1993-1994 story arc Nightfall, Bane, who had only recently been introduced into the comics, breaks Batman's back during a battle. Batman, who had been suffering from some major burnout at the time, is outsmarted by Bane, who cripples him, leaving Batman to find a replacement for himself. Now that Batman replacement is Azrael, whose much more violent methods turns Gotham against Batman, who all assume that Batman is just still the same Batman but has gone rogue. While the story arc results in Batman learning to lean on the trusted members of the Bat family more, the conflict between him and Bane almost broke his spirit as well, and has made for one of the most iconic images featuring the two. The whole arc took over a year to complete, and eventually, Batman was rehabilitated. See, much more believable than getting punched into a Kryptonian coma, just saying. And finally, in at number 1, Watchmen. Perhaps the one thing that's worse than being defeated by one of your equally intellectual arch enemies is being defeated by a teammate, and having that teammate actually help sort out the world better than you could have ever done. We're talking the Watchmen's defeat by one of their own, Adrian Veidt, aka Ozymandias. Now at the start of Watchmen, the group has been disbanded thanks to the Keene Act, which outlaws vigilantes. The whole story takes place in an alternate universe where Richard Nixon is still president, and asks Dr. Manhattan, an omnipotent superhero and the only one with real powers in the story, to intervene in Vietnam. So if that doesn't give you a clear idea on what this is, it is a dystopian society for sure. Set in an alternate version of the 80s on the verge of a nuclear war. And Ozymandias manages to find a way to make world peace happen. But he does that by obliterating parts of the Earth, which appears to be from alien invaders, but really was just caused by him and created by him. But it brings nations together with a common enemy. In the film adaptation, instead of a giant alien creature, Veidt uses Dr. Manhattan's energy against him and frames him for the disasters. Either way, while this is all going on, the rest of the Watchmen heroes end up going on a hunt for answers as to why one of their members, the comedian, was murdered, which eventually brings them to Ozymandias and unravels all of this plan. But of course, it's too late. The heroes, minus Rorschach, agree to be quiet about it, because despite how horrible Veidt's actions were, he was right. He saved the planet. And Dr. Manhattan is forced to kill Rorschach in order to keep everything a secret. In at number 10, Doctor Strange. Here we have a case of a character who had to lose everything he held dear in order to become the superhero he is today, which actually was for the better. We're talking about Dr. Stephen Strange. Significantly more self-centered than the other characters on our list, Strange, prior to becoming a master of the mystical arts, was an egotistical doctor who only cared about wealth and his impressive track record as a well-known, and arguably the best, surgeon around. He gets into a car crash which shatters the bones in his hands and causes major extensive nerve damage, resulting in his hands having an uncontrollable tremble. As a depressed drifter, he spends all of his wealth looking for a way to heal himself, and then he gets wind of the Ancient One. In the comics, he hears about the Ancient One when overhearing two sailors discussing them. And you guys know the rest of the story, or at least I hope. You should. If you don't, read some more Doctor Strange. In at number 9, Superman. Superman may be doing alright these days, but when the hero first realized the truth behind his origin, there was a period where he felt really lost. Sure, the Kents were awesome adoptive parents, but if they hadn't have found him, Superman would have had nothing. Superman's origin story is perhaps the most well known, aside from his DC pal Batman. Doomed planet, desperate scientists, last hope. That's the gist of it. That's also the succinct description taken exactly from this panel. When Krypton was about to implode, Superman aka Kal-El was sent off the planet in a last-bit attempt by his parents to save their baby boy from this cruel demise. His space shuttle pod would crash land on the planet Earth, where his Kryptonian physiology proved to be much more superior compared to the planet's native inhabitants, us humans. In at number 8, Martian Manhunter. Martian Manhunter is yet another character who calls Earth his adoptive home. First appearing in Detective Comics issue 225 in 1955, J'onn J'onzz is one of the most powerful beings in the DC universe, and he was one of the founding members of the Justice League. His debut story was The Strange Experiment of Dr. Ertl, which depicted him as a green-skinned alien who came from Mars, pulled to Earth by an experimental teleportation beam constructed by the scientist Dr. Ertl. Ertl is unable to send him back, and the shock of the encounter causes his death. J'onn then has no way of returning home, so he works with what he's got, and he uses the shapeshifting ability to come up with a human identity as a detective from Middletown, USA. Now, in his initial Silver Age version, the character is not said to be the last remaining Martian, nor is Mars a dead planet. Those were developments made later on, and actually, kind of take away more from him than he initially anticipated. Your race is pretty much dead, your home planet's desolate, you're the last one really kicking around, or so you think. That's gotta be hard on any hero. In at number 7, Deadman. Deadman Boston Brand first appeared in Strange Adventures issue 205 in 1967, and before Brand became the intangible supernatural hero, he was a circus trapeze artist. Murdered during a trapeze performance by a mysterious attacker who only went by the name of Hook, his spirit is endowed with the ability to possess any living sentient being that he desires as a means of obtaining justice. Here's where it gets real tragic though. Deadman is a disembodied spirit, and it's a lonely existence to have. He can't be seen or heard by most people with the exception of a few powerful mystics, and his main means of communication is by using other people's bodies. He also is unable to possess those with strong minds like Batman, or at least is forced out of their bodies within a very short amount of time. Plus, if Kingdom Come is any sort of indication, his future might not be the brightest, but definitely the boniest. In at number 6, Cyclops. When Cyclops first hit the scene in the X-Men issue 1, 1963, the character was the archetypal hero, the leader of the team who strived to do what was right following the teachings of Professor Charles Xavier. As time went on though, particularly in the modern age, we slowly watched Cyclops transition into a more militant leader, operating under more extreme ideologies and violent policies, which would eventually be his undoing. Now, to be fair, over the years, dude has lost Jean Grey numerous times, married her clone and had a kid with her, and was also possessed by the Phoenix Force, which led him to killing his mentor Charles Xavier, with those latter two events really not helping him much in the eyes of his peers. Towards the end of Avengers vs. X-Men, Hope Summers has to alter reality to undo all of the terrible things Cyclops and the Phoenix Five had done, and Scott is placed in a ruby quartz prison cell where he proceeds to admit that yes, he feels horrible for killing Xavier, but he is happy with how the mutant race has restarted, and that he would do it all over again if he had the choice. Yeah, that didn't bode well with a lot of heroes. He even tries to coax Wolverine into killing him in order to become a martyr. While he has redeemed himself in the more recent House of X, there was a period of time where things definitely weren't coming up Milhouse for the character.
At number 5, we have a sand being. This one's a bit of a way back playback, but in Superman issue number 233, an experiment is done to turn all kryptonite on Earth to iron, but at the same time a new being is formed in the sand. It's created from soil and rock and a burst of raw energy and cast in the mold of Superman. In the next issue, more is revealed. When he flies too close to Superman, he gets weak and dizzy and is forced to stop what he's in the middle of. Then, in issue 237, the sand thing smashes right into him and he loses his ability to fly. He falls right down through the atmosphere, crashes into the earth, and can't seem to fly again. He's still able to leap over a small mountain though, so that's good. In the same issue, he's able to feel bullets hit him, he can't quite bend the barrel of a gun, it's really hard work to knock these bad guys' heads together, he's just not himself. Eventually we discover that the sand creature comes from another dimension. He has 1/3 of Superman's power. The best surgeons are called to see if they can sort out the issue, but they can't really. Then he goes to battle the sand creature. They end up chasing each other through the center of the Earth's core, and it wreaks havoc on the Earth, as it would, and their battle is continuing in space. Superman is beside himself upset, and then he's pulled out of a trance that he had been put into to see what would happen if they dueled. So they didn't actually duel, and then they both decide that it's not worth it, but that the Sand Superman doesn't give back all of his powers to make sure that no one has that much power ever, and then he goes back to his own dimension. Although the next issue, he easily survives a supernova, so I'm not really sure if that stuck. It seems like it didn't really, but it was a thing. At number 4, we have a filter on yellow sunlight. In Batman the Animated Series, there is an episode called Solar Powers where Superman's resilience on yellow sunlight is focused on. Suddenly Superman finds his powers failing him. He starts to feel weak at just the wrong moment. Lois Lane is in danger of dying in a cable car that is stalled, and an emergency beam that is cutting the mechanism that's keeping it all together is happening. I know, it's stressful. He does save her, but it's really hard this time, and the weight of the cable car is just aggressive on him. The big bad in this episode is Luminous. He was an inventor at LexCorp until he blows the whistle on some of their questionable activities, and then of course has to leave, and ends up with a sour taste in his mouth. In this episode, he hacks LexCorp's satellites around the Earth, a jab at Lex, and programs them to filter out all the yellow sunlight, which is what Superman's powers are based on. So 2 birds, 1 stone here, Superman and Lex. Superman, or I guess we will just call him Clark now, has to figure out a way to put a stop to him as a regular man. Spoiler, he does. I know, you're shocked. In the last battle, he fires a laser shot at Spider-Man. It's deflected onto the master controls, shutting down the filter and allowing Superman, now at full power, to take Luminous to the police. At number 3, we have the old switcheroo. In Superman Batman issue number 53, Superman and Batman team up to fight the Silver Banshee. Now she has this special artifact with her called the Crawdor Brooch. The Silver Banshee ends up kicking their and running off, but Superman can't use his X-ray vision suddenly, and Batman is unharmed from what they just went through, so it's really strange. And then it turns out that they actually switched powers, which really means Batman is basically a god and Superman is just a dude, just a regular man now. Batman gets a little zealous with his newfound power and starts global patrols and gets more and more aggressive with the bad guys, so eventually the Justice League realizes that they kinda probably gonna have to take him down. But Superbat, I'm gonna call him, is just too strong. So they finally get Superbat and Superman together with the Crawdor Brooch and Zatanna's magic, and they're able to reverse what was done. At number 2, we have a Sun Eater. I know, it sounds cool, right? In the final night, there was a crossover. An alien refugee called Dusk shows up on Earth warning us that an exceptionally powerful entity called Sun Eater is coming to Earth. They do try to stop him, but sadly he does engulf our sun, and the Earth quickly becomes a dark, wintry wasteland. Everyone is getting very depressed, and it looks like humanity only has maybe 5 days before the Earth becomes totally uninhabitable. Once again, the yellow sun is gone, so Superman loses most of his power, but just most. Love how writers change it up depending on what's needed for the story. Who should show up to save the day but Hal Jordan? He's recently come back from turning into an evil Parallax, so he's trying to get some good karma here, I think. He ends up flying right into the dying sun, absorbing all the energy from it, redirects the energy with his green energy, and reignites the sun. Thank goodness he was in the neighborhood to help Superman out. At number 1, we have Red Kryptonite. In the War of Superman, there are Kryptonite supercriminals Zod, Non, and Ursa. They threaten to destroy Earth when once again the new Krypton explodes. Tough planet to be on. This time the gang assembles and it is Superboy, Nightwing, Supergirl, Flamebird, Steel, and the Guardian. Superman and Supergirl fly into space and are trying to stop the attack before it even gets to us, but Lex is working with Zod and happens to have a red kryptonite missile waiting for them. He fires it at them and they start suffocating in the vacuum of space when they lose their powers. Thankfully, Flamebird steps in and burns as bright as she possibly can over to make the yellow sun burn through the red kryptonite to get them their powers back. Sadly, this uses all of her energy and she actually loses her life instead. Silver lining though, this just lights a fire under the gang to take Zod out even quicker.
In at number 10, Thanos. Wolverine was part of the onslaught of heroes who attacked Thanos' base camp in space. In the Infinity Gauntlet series, specifically in issue 3 from 1991, Thanos obtains all of the Infinity Gems and tosses them into the gauntlet, using his newfound omnipotence to pull a few stunts that'll impress his love interest, Mistress Death. Spoiler alert, he doesn't impress her, and she continually rejects him, making him go out of his way to be even more of an exhibitionist. Anywho, he snaps, wipes out half of all living beings in the universe, you guys know the spiel, and Adam Warlock rallies the remaining heroes and villains, and all of the celestial entities that are still kicking around to get together and attack Thanos' fortress in space. And it fails. Miserably. In the process, Wolverine attacks the Mad Titan and his adamantium bones are transformed into spongy rubber, causing him to flop to the ground defenseless. Gotta give to Thanos though, at least he got creative with his kills. He dropped Cyclops' head in an indestructible box, causing the mutant to kill himself with his own optic blasts. Like, damn dude, that's some sinister. It's actually kind of funny, like if you were like Thanos' buddy, you'd be like, haha, yeah, good one, man. Like Mephisto's just there chilling being like, oh, that was funny, that was smart. Turn Wolverine to sponge, lol. But actually he just killed a bunch of people though, so it's not that funny. And at number 9, Spock. Actually, no joke, no word of a lie, Spock of the Star Trek franchise once knocked Wolverine out with one blow. In 1996, the X-Men and Star Trek had a crossover comic released, aptly titled Star Trek X-Men. In it, when the X-Men first encounter Spock, the Vulcan declares that he must accompany the team to security. But Wolverine cuts him off by saying that the X-Men ain't in the habit of answering to no one. Despite Cyclops being like, yo dude, stop, chill. Spock reacts brilliantly and calmly, using his Vulcan nerve pinch to immediately knock Logan to the ground. Sometimes brains are more superior to brawn. Up next, number 8, Lady Deathstrike. Wolverine and Lady Deathstrike really don't like each other. Deathstrike, who also had adamantium bonded to her skeleton along with other cybergenetic enhancements, has always felt that she needs to prove herself by killing off Logan. Now, in this case, in Uncanny X-Men issue 205 to 207, Lady Deathstrike, a cyborg at the time, teamed up with Wade Cole, Angela McCann, and Murray Reese in an attempt to defeat Wolverine once and for all. While they didn't manage to kill him, these cyborgs' longevity outmatched Wolverine's and actually exhausted him so much that his healing ability wore down, critically injuring him. Now he's rescued by the Morlocks and taken underground into their tunnels to recover, eventually being restored to full health, despite a brief moment where the other X-Men were unsure whether or not his healing factor did indeed have limitations. So it definitely was a close one for Wolverine. In at number 7, Squirrel Girl. Squirrel Girl Doreen Green made a fool out of Wolverine in New Avengers issue 15. Now the two of them were having a friendly fight, in which Squirrel Girl proceeded to kick Logan's in front of the New Avengers, which really was her just emasculating him thanks to the two of them having hooked up in the past and him being, well, really Logan about it all. Later on in a Wolverine comic book, he actually sees her as part of a sexual fantasy of his, alongside Emma Frost and Mystique. So, confirmed, they did the dirty. Squirrel Girl has a pretty impressive record when it comes to kicking butt beyond the extent of her abilities. She's like highly underrated. She has defeated the likes of Dr. Doom, Thanos, and Galactus, which the latter she just really had a pleasant conversation with. Now to be fair, their friendly fight was one that consisted of Wolverine not using his claws, but still, she whooped his butt and totally emasculated him. And then all of her squirrels teamed up and was like, we're gonna kick your because we're her squirrel buddies and you done her wrong. And Jessica Jones was like, yo! Her and Luke Cage were watching with their little baby. It was really cute. In at number 6, Kitty Pryde. Kitty Pryde is not a character to be taken lightly. Her phasing abilities have proven to be utterly devastating when she uses them to cause fatal injuries, which is something she once had to do to Wolverine. While she's fought her mutant pal on several occasions in alternate realities, Kitty's most iconic beating of Wolverine came when he was under the influence of Hydra in the Enemy of the State storyline. Now it is worth noting that while this whole brainwashing story was part of the 616, the story in which Kitty phases through him is in a What If, titled What If Wolverine Enemy of the State issue 1, and follows the what if of What if Wolverine never broke free from the Hand's control? There's a lot going on in this story, guys. Brainwashed by the evil Hydra, Wolverine went on a rampage attempting to kill off his fellow X-Men, and Kitty has to phase her hand through Logan's head, leaving her hand inside of his skull in order to kill him. Now the character struggled to heal properly after she essentially scrambled his brains, ultimately causing his death, and she lost a hand, but girl did what had to be done. Sometimes you just gotta phase through someone's head and leave your hand in there. You lose a hand, but you save the world.
Number 5. Wonder Woman. This one is only ranked so low because it is so brutal and it hurts my heart whenever I think about it. This fight happened in an alternate timeline where Superman and Batman become tyrannical leaders. Wonder Woman was one of the few heroes left who was attempting to save the world from their fascist supremacy. She managed to take out Bruce, but unfortunately was no match for the enraged Superman that she ended up crossing paths with, who was obviously pissed that she had taken out his BFF, Batman. Clark didn't just beat Wonder Woman though, no. He destroyed her. He demolished her shield, blasted through her bracelets, and ended up strangling her with her own lasso of truth. Oh, devastating. Number 4. The Hulk. Any battle with the Hulk proves interesting as not many can take on the Green Giant and come out victorious. Well, the Hulk is Marvel and Superman is DC. We all bow down to the Hulk's strength, no matter what side of the fence we're on here. In other words, if a hero can beat the Hulk, it means something, namely that they are one of the strongest heroes in existence, because Hulk is on another level when it comes to his strength. During this crossover, Bruce Banner ended up being agitated by Lex Luthor and transforming into the Hulk in Metropolis. With innocence in danger, Superman swooped in and was forced to fight the Hulk out of the area. Superman fought him all the way to his Fortress of Solitude, but found himself unable to calm the Hulk down, and was forced to beat the Hulk by punching him so hard that he was knocked into the Phantom Zone. Now that is some strength. Number 3. Dr. Fate. This battle was a surprisingly quick one. You would think that it wouldn't even be a fair fight for the Man of Steel due to his weakness to magic, a weakness that really only exists to prevent him from being so overpowered. Remember the original Superman, like before the 80s? No weaknesses, and he just seemed to have a limitless amount of convenient superpowers? Oh, those were the ultimate days for a caped vigilante. No longer, unfortunately. Superman was retconned and given limits and weaknesses to make him a more interesting character. After all, everyone enjoys reading about his struggle. We want to see Superman, try and fail sometimes. This battle between Dr. Fate and Earth 2 Superman, the Kal-El clone known as Brutal, was not that though. Not a struggle. Not at all. Superman snuck up on the magical hero and smashed his helmet, which is kind of Dr. Fate's power source. Therefore, in doing so, he instantly defeated him. Well, that was easy.
That was easy.
Number 2. Thor. In the JLA/Avengers series from 2003, we saw the two famous superheroes from competing comic book powerhouse publishers come to blows as they raced one another to prevent the opposing team from seizing the 12 items of power. In the series, we saw a battle that put Thor up against Superman in the Savage Lands in a one-on-one fight over the Cosmic Cube. These two strong characters had always been a heated topic of debate for fans who mulled at who would be the victor should the two come to blows in a crossover. The answer? Superman proved to be the stronger after stopping an attack from Thor and then just KOing him in a battle, ending the famed debate once and for all. Just kidding, I'm sure everyone's still debating. Y'all can have a debate in the comments who you think would win again in a fight. Number 1. Shazam. In the Injustice Gods Among Us video game, we saw these two similar heroes come to blows. While many might think that Shazam having magic at his disposal would allow him to make quick work of Superman, being that Superman's weakness is magic, turns out they'd be wrong. In Injustice, we see a darker side of Superman, one who is no longer holding back his power. He freezes Shazam's mouth shut and melts his brain with his heat vision after Shazam disagrees with the Man of Steel. Yikes. Remind me to never get in an argument with Injustice Superman.